Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to SYCKpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the SYCK Career Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba. If you have yet to meet an awesome career strategist, you're going to meet one on today's episode. She walked away from the corporate life and has been doing some fantastic things as an entrepreneur. Before we get into the conversation, what's new in the Stein world these days? I've heard you've been doing the rounds with MBA programs and working with current and former students. What's that about?
Yeah, Russ, if you haven't heard, I like to talk.
Is that true?
That's true. I do like to talk. And I've been talking a lot at a lot of MBA programs, both to current students and former alumni. I just recently spoke at MIT, the Sloan School of Business, and I really enjoy that. I like speaking to the folks that are getting their MBAs, recently graduated. I sunk $138,000 in my MBA. I have gotten lots of returns on that, and I try to help shed some light with the students and the alumni about how they can leverage that investment into a great career. And I've, in addition to MIT, been speaking with NYU. Of course, I always go back to my alma mater, Columbia Business School, spoken at University of Washington, the Simon School of Business, which is one of my favorite places to go, which, by the way, is one of the most diverse MBA programs in the world. So I'm actually going up there in January or February, which is going to be damn cold to be going up to Rochester then. But I'll wear a parka, wear my long johns, and bundle up.
I don't know how much colder it could be from Brooklyn. I mean, once I get north of the Mason-Dixon line, cold is cold. But I love...
You don't know your New York geography, Russ, and I know you're calling in from Florida, but Brooklyn and Rochester, New York are very different.
Well, I'll tell you this. I was born in Queens, and the only difference between Queens and Rochester is you can hide behind buildings in Queens to keep the wind from cutting right through you. But going back to the MBA thing, I love how you're paying it forward. All right, so what can a career strategist do for you? Let's get into it with Tori Stevens, Alan's latest guest on the SYCK Career Podcast.
I'm excited to have Tori Stevens on our SYCK podcast today here. I was very fortunate to meet Tori just through the power of networking, which is something that I always recommend people to invest in, building network, building relationships. So I happen to work with someone at Salesforce. He knew what I was doing with Kadima, and he's like, you got to meet this woman, Tori. She is a fantastic... I think he might have called you a career coach, but we'll get into it shortly about how you're really more of a career strategist.
Yes.
But he's like, you got to meet this woman, Tori. She's amazing. And I followed up with you. We had a conversation, which was fantastic. Not only was that conversation good, and I was like, I got to have this woman, Tori, on my podcast. But then you also put me in touch with my designer, Sarah Wells, who's phenomenal also. So the power of networking is huge. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. But without further ado, Tori, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the Acceleration Nation out there who's listening to this podcast.
Absolutely. So I'm a very energetic, thought-provoking, growth mindset person who my favorite question is why? And those were aspects of me that I did not bring out unless I was behind closed doors in a safe environment, knowing that it was going to be accepted. And then one day about 4 years ago, the knock in me got so loud that I said, I really need to walk away from my corporate gig and I need to become an entrepreneur. And I created a company called EvolYOUtion. I spell it a little bit differently with the word YOU in the middle because I think it's your responsibility to know who you are and what to do with yourself associated to your career and your life. And so I am a career strategist who does speaking, consulting gigs, and one-on-one coaching from a career perspective. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I'm originally from Michigan. And a fun fact is I own a horse. I've always been an equestrian. And so even after I stopped competing about 10 years ago, I kept the best asset, which was the horse. So it's very fun.
Nice. And I know during the pandemic with all these Zoom calls, sometimes you'll have a dog or a kid run into the screen. I'm assuming your horse is put away somewhere safe?
That's right. Yeah. So he is not on the property. I live about 20 minutes from uptown, which is what we call, quote, downtown, the big buildings in Charlotte. And so he's about 45 minutes away. But I have this great house that I truly feel like I manifested. It's exactly what I was looking for. And the life that I live is also something that is very important to me from an intentionality perspective.
And that intentionality it really rang true to me when we first spoke about really being thoughtful and conscientious about who you are and what you do. Talk a little bit about your philosophy on that. Like, how did you arrive at that? And how do you teach that to your clients?
Yeah. So my most impactful book that I read when I was about 20 was Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. And that book changed my life. That was Oprah's first book club that she did, and she hosted him. The book gave me all the words that I didn't know how to say, but I knew were existing in the air. So for example, there's a chapter on this thing called pain bodies. And what was fascinating is that you can see, like when you meet somebody and you can feel that energy or you can feel that personality, but you're like, I don't know what's going on here. Like they look like they're a happy person, but there's this tinge in them that you can't ignore. That's a pain body. And so it was all these things that I had seen mostly from an intangible perspective, since emotions are intangible or somebody's character is intangible, or even obviously the words we use are intangible, that you could see it in the air, but I didn't know what to do with it. So fast forward, I didn't realize how much intentionality I've always had in my life. So the house that I live in, the horse that I own, the truck I used to drive, how I got down to North Carolina. I mean, speaking of the power of network, here's a fast story for you about intentionality. It was 2010. I was a master's student at Central Michigan University working on my degree in higher education or educational leadership. I was working a full-time job in career services, and my boss took me to the NACE conference, which is the National Association of College Employers. It was in Texas. We get off the plane. We're waiting for the bus. There's this guy standing next to me. By the way, this isn't a romantic story. Everybody always goes, did you meet your boyfriend or whatever? And I'm like, no. So spill the beans there. And so I'm standing next to him and you just get this vibe. It's the same thing with like Jeremy that we're talking about. Like I got the vibe off of Jeremy the minute that I met him, the guy that you know from Salesforce. And so I'm standing next to this guy and I'm like, I need to get to know him and I don't know why. So for a week, we're at this conference, we get to know one another. That was the time where everybody was became Facebook friends with one another, regardless if you even knew their last name, right? And so 2 years later, I'm posting, I was very open with my boss that you're on borrowed time with me. And like, I want to leave Michigan. So now it's 2010. It's 2012 now. So I met this guy in 2010. It's now 2012. I'm posting that I want to go visit places. And he reaches out to me and says, well, are you interested in Charlotte, North Carolina? You should come visit me. And I'm like, I've never been to the city before, but it's on my list of places, my short list of places I'm interested in moving to. Though I had never been there, I didn't want snow in my life anymore. I was like, it's gotta go. But I wanted some seasons. So I get on a plane, come visit him, stay on his couch, don't know him from Adam. I'm like, what am I doing here? And I get a phone call 3 hours after I show up. Hey, this is UNC Charlotte. You applied to a job like 4 or 5 months ago. We're finally ready to interview. Are you still available? I'm like, I'm sitting in your town and our city, and I've never been here before, and I don't know this guy. And now I applied to this job that I don't even remember. Sure, why not? Do you want to interview me? And they're like, no, just enjoy your weekend and like, we'll interview you on Monday. I'm like, okay, great. So he takes me to this thing called Food Truck Friday. And he's like, oh, by the way, my friends are going to meet us. His guy friend's girlfriend, she and I hit it off. We go get food while they go get drinks. And she's like, tell me more about you. So I'm like, I don't even know where I am right now. And I love this city so much. And then I get this phone call and she goes, well, where are you going to live? And I'm like, again, I don't even know where I'm at. She goes, well, this is too perfect not to say. I just put in my notice at Teach for America as a recruiter. I'm going to finish out the rest of their recruiting season. And I'm going to need somebody to rent my fully furnished condo in 6 weeks from now because I'm going to go travel the world for 4 months. So would you like to rent my condo if you decide to take this job? I'm like, great, let's go look at it. So the next day, so that's where I stayed when I came down to interviews with this woman that I didn't know. And then that's where I lived when I moved down 2 weeks later. And I never saw the guy again that I stayed with that worked at Duke Energy until 3 years later, when I pulled my mom off a plane and was being very intentional on finding my house. And I saw him again. And I was like, you're like my lucky rabbit's foot, because an hour later, I found my dream house. So it's just like, again, it's all this visioning, it's all manifesting, it's all intentionality, but none of this happens. This is the reason why I teach it. What I teach in my one-on-one coaching and presentations is I teach people how to think, to talk, to walk. And I think the missing link of the world is we don't think. We're not curious from a knowledge, wisdom, and information perspective. And that's what the thought process or the think process is about. We're not curious because we have a judgment, assumption, or expectation, or the need to know what the end outcome is something is going to be before we do it. And it just limits us again and again and again. And so when you give that up, and you start asking questions and gaining curiosity, you have perspective. And that perspective allows you to lean back in your life versus always be leaning forward. Like, I have to know everything. I have to be in control. I have to figure this out on my own. You lean back and you let the world show up for you. And that includes people or whatever else. So that's a bit of it. I can talk later on about the talk and the walk process, but that's the missing piece for me, is that we all talk a good game and our actions and our words don't match. And then we run to the wall and we slide down it and go, why did that happen to me? Which is victim mentality versus saying, I'm the common denominator. It's my responsibility to understand myself before I ask the world or something external to show up for me.
And you talk there, I think you alluded to the thinking, the talking, the walking. And I think the criticality of the thinking ahead of time of, if I understand it correctly, of thinking about where you perhaps want to go or what your goals are or what's important before you start doing the talking and walking. Is that the proper way that I'm understanding it, or am I misconceiving the thinking part?
Sure. So I would shift it slightly. And what I would say is begin with the end in mind. So for example, when that's a Stephen Covey reference from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, great book if you haven't read it, anybody listening. When here's the thing is that, for example, I was having a coffee conversation this morning with a prospective client, and she has about 10 years left before she would like to retire. And she was like, I'm really great at my job, but I don't know what to do in my next job. And I want to leave my organization that I've been with for like well over almost 2 decades, right? And she goes, but I don't know what to do. And I said, it's not that you don't know what to do. It's that you don't know what legacy that you're leaving in the world, nor do you understand what seeds of significance that you have planted in others that you will be able to see the fruits of your labor later on or even in front of you right now. And she said, that's exactly it. That's what a midlife and quarter life crisis has got, is that they don't understand how they're making an impact in this world, because they understand it's the opposite of what Simon Sinek says, right? He's like, these people only know what they're doing. He's asking them, which is the piece that's missing, of why you're doing what you're doing. And that's the missing link. That's what people are asking me to be a part of their life about, is let's begin with the end in mind. Let's throw everything against the wall. Who cares what sticks? We can, be on a dry erase board, figuratively or like physically, and let's just write it out and just dream big and not have a judgment, an assumption, or an expectation. And that's what's missing.
And that's some sick advice that you're quoting from Stephen Covey about like begin with the end in mind. And as people think about, and you're a career strategist, so applying that thinking with the end in mind, or begin with the end in mind. How do you advise that for clients that you work with as they're thinking about their career journey, either their next step or several steps out? How do you help people to begin with the end in mind?
Sure. So typically when somebody comes to me, the pain that they're experiencing is, I don't want to do the same type of job that I have been doing, but I also don't want to go get another education. And that's what I feel like I have to do in order to change. I also don't want to start from the bottom up any longer. And of course, I need to make more money than what I'm currently making right now. And is that a feasible option? So these are individuals who are typically at least 10 years post-undergrad career. If they went to undergrad, they could be 10, 20, 30 years in. It's all the same thing. It's the mentality that they have. I love to call that mentality entry-level mentality, because you are pulling on from the past of what it was like when you found past jobs or the current job that you're in, versus you've got to shift where you are feeling or where you're at and look at the future. So number one, most people's resume is a mere reflection of where they've been and not where they want to go. And so they're always like, we got to work on my resume. Will you do my resume for me? Like, isn't the resume the most important thing? I can give two shits about somebody's resume when I start working with them. It doesn't matter to me, because that is the tangible product that we will get because we haven't done the work yet from the thought process. I don't care what you've done in the past. I need to understand what's missing in your life or what you want more of. This is like, I think what's so fascinating, like when Sheryl Sandberg said in the book Lean In that most women only apply to a job that they feel like they know 90%. Well, it's because what you just did when you think you need to know 90%, you have like no learning curve in that new job. And so then you get bored with that job 6 months, a year later, and then you look at the recruiter or you look at the program manager, and I've been both of those in the past, and they would look at me and go, I need a different job, or I need more money, or this is boring, I need to do something else. And I was like, not my fucking problem. Like, you didn't push yourself. I pushed on you. You told me this is what you wanted. I gave you what you wanted. But because at that time, there was a scarcity mindset going on of, I'm just trying to be everything you want me to be because I don't want to be where I currently am any longer. And so this seems like the easy way out. But now I recognize, oh, just kidding. This isn't the same thing that I've wanted that I've had in the past. And so now because I'm in pain, it's got to be everybody else's responsibility to figure out what to do with me. And then it's your job to put me somewhere else. I'm like, no, it's not. That's your job. So this is the career strategist part. These are the couple of first months that I have to work on with people, is to say, I'm going to litmus test your thoughts. I'm going to poke the bear, as I like to call it, by saying like, what do you mean by that? Or hang on, you just talked out of both sides of your mouth, or help me understand that. Or that feels like the cart before the horse. I'm taking their words and I'm mirroring them back to them. And I'm saying them in a slightly different way so that they can actually hear what I said, so that they recognize how they're showing up or how they're being interpreted. Because people only know what to do with you. It's your job. One word, sorry, totally forgot. It's people only know what you tell them. So if you don't even have yourself figured out, why would anybody else know what to do with you?
Yeah. And something you alluded to there, I find a lot of people know how to describe what they don't want in their current situation. And it's a lot more challenging for people to visualize and document what they do want.
Yeah.
How do you help people get there? Because a big part of Kadima and how we work is think about those goals, try to crystallize it. And because I work with people that generally are trying to find jobs at large corporations, then identify those corporations that will map those goals, that will meet those goals and expectations. Sometimes I have challenges with that with individuals. How do you effectively help people crystallize those goals so that they can begin charting their path to where they want to head to?
Yeah. So it deals with one of the first things that you just mentioned a couple of seconds ago, which is They can crystallize what they don't want, but they don't know how to articulate what they do want. And this is where I think it all goes back to the minute you advocate or own yourself, there is this notion out in society. And let's just preface that each and every one of us is a member of society. So we are instilling this habit again and again. We're not innocent in this, right? If we don't take ownership and we think it's somebody else's job to fix the messaging, that's not going to get us anywhere as a collective whole. So here's what I think it is. This is ego. I think that the minute that you say, I'm really good at something, your ego kicks in and goes, you shouldn't say that, you're arrogant, that's not safe and secure, you don't have information, who do you think you are in order to be able to say that about you? And so what happens is, this is what I always tell people, when you've given your career keys away to somebody else and you said, dear manager, dear leadership, dear organization, it's your responsibility to know what to do with me, you have devalued your worth and value, and you have said it's somebody else's job to know what to do with me. And since the only proof of concept that you currently have is what's on your resume from what you've done in the past, there's no bridge. You are the bridge that you have to build to say, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. But that would make you say, I have to honor and own myself. I have to figure out the words. I have to create, like, I love when Brene Brown says, like, strong back, soft heart. You have to have your own back. And the people that work with me, I call them chameleons. And this goes along with what we're saying here, Alan, because here's what happens. They change the color of their skin depending upon what room that they're in and who they're talking to and what their goal is and what their initiative is. And when you do that, you're fucked. Like, you got to have a boundary on you, because if you keep changing who you are for everybody else, it means that you're testing you're not trusting your worth and your value of yourself. And you keep doing this whole, like, put your hands out, like, do you like me? Did I do well enough? Did you approve enough? And when you do that, you're just perpetuating the habit of never owning yourself. So I think that's what's got to be taken care of first. And there's a lot of head trash in when that's happening. Head trash is this notion of the conspiracy theories that you live in, that you believe to be true, but have no factual information.
Yeah. And you've worked in, before you started out on your own with your phenomenal coaching business or career strategist business, you worked in talent acquisition. So you were on, like, the buy side of all these individuals almost, versus now you're working with clients of essentially selling themselves, marketing themselves to these organizations. What do you think the individuals get wrong that, because I find often they're not thinking about from the buyer's perspective of what they're looking for, but like having that mentality of being on the buy side, the talent acquisition side, how does that influence what you teach and strategize with your clients on about how to, like, land those jobs, get those opportunities, move up within the organization?
Yeah. So before I was even in corporate as either a recruiter or program manager, I was in higher education and career services. And I would build and run these mock interview or resume programs. And with 5 full-time staff and 30,000 students, you got to have a train the trainer program going on. Like, you can't be the only ones with information, right? Or you're only going to see seniors who are flipping the fuck out that, like, they need a job or they need an internship to graduate or whatever. So this is the talk and this is the walk process that you're talking about. So the talk process we've been mentioning, which is the trust, the worth, and the value. You got to get the you got to get, like, the internalness going on first to get the confidence to show up. When everybody's like, I need to be more confident. And I'm like, okay, it's because there's a lack of trust. That's what's happening. The walk process is you need advocates, ambassadors, and champions. You got to connect. And so it's back to one of the first things that we were talking about, which is about the power of your network. And a lot of the time, the power of your network needs to get cleaned up or it needs to get elevated, because there's a lot of people in your network or life in general that I think are probably living on borrowed seasons or expired seasons. Like that whole rationale, like everybody's in your life for a reason or a season. I think there's a lot of people that are expired in people's lives and that season is done, except we keep reverting back to the same people. So I think that when you're networking with people, it's kind of like when your friends used to, you had probably that one friend who always mooched off of you and was like, hey, I'm only going to be around you when I need something from you. That's the same thing of how you get companies to see you as a whole human versus just when you need a meal ticket from them, is that you have to build authentic rapport relationships that don't have an objective, because that would mean you have a judgment, an assumption, or an expectation, and you are getting to know this person from a human to human perspective. And when you take this, I need something from you off the table, I think that that's when you can have authentic conversations with others and ask transparent questions about what they're looking for or where their organization is going or why did they stay at that company or what keeps them there or why did they decide to leave their old company that they were at. So I think when you get to know the other side of the table versus just make it about you and what your needs are, what you need, you change the game. And then the fun part is then you're teaching that person how to be an advocate for you in other rooms. And so maybe you don't land at that company, but maybe they tell you about another company you didn't even know about. And now they're going to call that company on your behalf and be like, hey man, I've got this great candidate. I can't use him, but he'd be great in your organization.
And I think that's some real sick advice there. Like building these relationships and not necessarily asking for something at the time, but investing in these relationships that may pay off dividends down the road.
Yes.
And talk about how you do that or how you would because I find often a lot of my clients will reach out to someone and send them a resume of, hey, can you help me find a job? It's like, no, yes, that is ultimately what you're trying to do. You are trying to find the job. But once you do that, you're going to scare people off. There's too much commitment there. There's too much responsibility. So you need to nurture that relationship. You need to build it in an authentic manner. I think you use that term. What sort of advice do you have for people about building those relationships so that you're not just reaching out to someone when you see a fresh role at Facebook, but you've already had that relationship with someone at Facebook so that when you see that role pop up 6 months from now, you can reach out to Tori and say, hey, Tori, I see this role there. But
even that you don't even have to reach out any longer because now they're reaching out to you because you've built the relationship prior without the expectation. And now they're like, you need to be in, like, I've already said something. All you got to do is apply.
So how did you get people to start that building? Because you won't necessarily see the results right away. The first meeting, the first interaction, you might get some advice. You might get some words of wisdom. You're not getting a job. Right.
So I think what I love that you're saying, and these are the words that I would put towards it. Are you playing the long-term game or the short-term game? So for example, Jeremy Blaney, who connected you and I together, him and I have a long-term game. I recruited him at Bank of America at least 6 to 7 years ago. And yet I have not seen Jeremy in person since right after I became an entrepreneur. That was at least 4 years ago. And yet here he is sending a message between you and I. Now we text every once in a while. We follow each other on social media, but the last person I've actually talked to is his wife 2+ years ago when they were interested in bringing me into her organization. So I've not talked to Jeremy, and yet here he is connecting you and I together because there is an authentic rapport in that of I help you, you help me, but there's no score that we're keeping here. It's because you add value to my life and I add value to your life and we keep moving forward and I will continue to meet you with where you're at or be your advocate in another room. That, right? So I have another one that I hired a year after Jeremy, and now she's working with me, and I haven't physically seen her in 6 years since I hired her at the bank and stuff. So it's this authentic. And by the way, I talk to her maybe once a year on text message, but we again follow each other on social media. So how do you do this? So 1, are you playing the long-term or short-term game? 2, are you paying it forward? is this an equal and opposite reaction, or is it just pull, 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 pull? So there's a really awesome podcast that's about like 7 examples of rest. And one of them is social. And here's what I'm going to tell you. That one's the one that takes me out all the time, because if the social side of like, Tori, can you do this for me? Tori, can you send this email? Tori, can you give me your time? Tori, can you look at my resume? But that just pulls on me, because if you're not going to help fill my cup back up, I get it. It's my responsibility to fill the most of it up, but my network is my net worth, either from a dollar perspective or from a value perspective of myself. So it's just so important. I think the other way to make authentic relationships. So here's a prime example. Maybe one person, I would love everybody to challenge me on this. Maybe one person will reach out to either you or I per this podcast. The same thing happens in presentations. I will be in a room filled with hundreds of people and one person will reach out to me, because the amount of head trash that they got going on about, she's so busy, she's not going to want to talk to me, she's going to be too much money, she this, they project on me about their crap, their insecurities, right? Their head trash that they got going on. You made that notion. But I said at the end of the presentation or during or at this podcast, I'm game to talk to anybody. It's a free call to be able to have with me. But that ball's in your court and you have to take the first step. But most people don't. What they wait for is to be in so much pain in their life that they have to do something about it.
Yeah, so, and that point of desperation is really tough to reach out to, like to get the courage and also to be open to listening and learning when you're in that state. There's ways to turn that around, but yes, you don't want to be that far along, ideally.
Right. Absolutely. Or the other thing is, if you're authentically networking and you've done your homework in the sense of you're listening to podcasts, you're reading books, you've been connecting with other people, you've been viewing TED Talks, you've been developing yourself. Because in whatever way that looks like, when you're networking with somebody, you can say, oh my gosh, I listened to a great podcast, I want to send it to you. And so you just message that off. So I just saw Carla Harris speak. Oh my gosh, she's amazing. She's at JP Morgan and like a total game changer. And she said, do not ask for anything unless you do 4 things for that person before you ask for a favor. And what's fascinating is in her book, she was like, if anybody reaches out to me, like I want to be able to give transparent, authentic advice to them, guess what I'm about ready to do? I'm going to read the book and then I'm going to reach out to her and I'm going to be like, I'm going to call her out. I'm going to be like, hey man, you said that if, people reach out to you that you would give them your time. Well, here I am. Most people don't do that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. What do you, have you ever had a negative experience of trying to reach out to somebody?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And talk a little bit about that. And then after that, then tell me why that hasn't stopped you from continuing to reach out to people.
Sure. When I first became an entrepreneur, you can look at it just like if I was job searching, right? Like I'm looking for connections. I'm looking for opportunities to speak. I'm looking for consulting gigs. I'm looking to just be known so that people know that there's a service I can provide to them. And I had a couple of great friends that first off, I asked them, I said, do you know anybody with like this experience in this field that you feel that I should talk to build my network up authentically, right? And I will never forget this. I got on the phone and the woman was like, basically, what the fuck are we doing on this phone call and what do you want from me? And I just don't understand what we're even doing here. And like, what's your question? This doesn't make sense to me. I've had that happen a couple of times. One of them recently said, this was like 6 months ago, said like, her head trash came out. She's like, I'm in a different field than you are. And like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to help you. And like, the only reason why I took this phone call is because so-and-so introduced us. And like, I don't know what I can do for you. It was so awkward. And I just remember going, okay, this is, one for the books, like onward and upward. And I just said, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the detail that you gave me. And like, have a nice day. And the call ended like 20 minutes early than it was supposed to, but I cut it off. I was thinking, I'm not going to sit on this phone call and get in my head and think of like, it's me that's doing something wrong or like, whatever. I just chalked it up to a practice round. and just moved along and just kept going again. But what I didn't do is I didn't judge myself that I was the thing that was wrong in this conversation, or I was like, there was something wrong that I did. That's what a lot of people do when they feel like it's not going right, is that they take responsibility for something that probably isn't theirs to take responsibility for. There's 7.5 billion people on this planet. You're not going to jive with everybody. Move along.
And I think they almost did you a favor, because you were able to ascertain very quickly that this person doesn't seem like a giver. And let me save 20 minutes of my conversation here and move on to the next one.
Yes. You know what was interesting is this person, who is a phenomenal networker and a phenomenal connector to me, she's given me some interesting bad apples. And so I went to her and I said, I think that people are taking my phone calls because of who you are, but they don't want to take the phone calls. And so I think what you perhaps could say, my thought would be, hey, tell me your thoughts about what I just said to you about Tori before I introduce you. What are you hearing me say? And please be genuine with me, because if the answer is no, that's okay. So that's what I do for others too. I'm like, I give them an out. I say, I would like to connect you to this person, but if this isn't a pairing, that's okay. I'd rather you tell me that, because my brand is being associated with either if it goes well or if it doesn't go well. And so I need to know that, because again, people place, stories on one another and judgments on one another. And so I'm like, let's just be frank here. Let's just be two adults having a conversation. Yeah. And if you're like, no, I don't have enough time right now and 6 months would be better, or no, I feel like I can't do that, I'd rather have that any day than this bullshit of like, I'm going to do it for you and I'm not going to tell the truth, and then I'll just dump it on somebody else.
Yeah. And Steve Dalton, who wrote the book, The 2 Hour Job Search, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he talks about there's like 3 different type of people when you reach out to. There's curmudgeons, people that won't even reply to you and just grumps. There are obligates. So people that you're referring to here that just take the meeting out of guilt because they don't feel comfortable enough of saying no. And then there's advocates or boosters. And the first one, the curmudgeons, they're almost doing you a really great favor because they're not responding to you. And to your point, a lot of people do put that on themselves of, hey, nobody wants to talk to me, but it's often that individual, or maybe it's something that you're doing of the way you reach out to the people. So you need to like think if there's a pattern going on there. But for the obligates, that's the biggest waste of time, because people are meeting with you because they are not comfortable enough saying, you know what, I don't have anything to tell you and I don't have any time for you.
That's right.
Rather, they're wasting your time. So I would rather get that out front if possible.
Yes.
Don't waste their time. Don't waste my time.
Yeah. So I think there's something really important that you're also saying, Alan, which is people operate in their child self, their teenage self, or their adult self when they're having a conversation with somebody else. And the thing is that I think there's a lot of expectation that one person who wants something from another person places on that person. And they think that maybe because that person that they want to talk to is in leadership, that they have their shit figured out way more than you do. And so that's where that like I'm going to decipher if I'm good enough or not per how this conversation goes on, is because there's this hierarchy thing happening here or whatever. And so the thing is that the woman who should have said no to me was operating in her teenage self. She was throwing a temper tantrum and basically said it on the phone of, the only reason why I took this phone call is because of our mutual connection, but I don't have anything to say to you. And so do you need anything from me? And I was like, nope, I'm good. I'm just going to end. You know what? That's okay. Thanks so much for telling me that. I'm actually just going to end this call right now because you've already told me what you feel, and that's all right. Thanks so much for being frank. Boom. So I was in my adult self and she was not. And so somebody's got to take ownership. And so when you're vibing with somebody, it's normally because you're on the same level versus, when sometimes they're like, there's nothing I can do for you and I'm super busy right now. And I don't even understand why we're talking. Victim judgment, pushing on to somebody else and not being an adult and taking responsibility.
And so you talk a lot about taking personal accountability, ownership of things. Expound on that a little bit. How do you weave that into your career strategy that you work with people? And how do you help change people's mindset about from like the victim to the owner or the player?
Sure. So even for somebody to sign up with me, they have to recognize that they're the ones who are causing the pain within their life. So they're doing this whole, I was interpreting the way that my life was happening to me, through me, versus recognizing I'm the one who gets to interpret how life is happening through me to me. So it's like the opposite, right? Instead of going, everything is happening and I am out of control of it, they're like, oh, there are a lot of elements that I can control about this.
Yeah. And I think Tony Robbins says things don't happen to me, it happens for me.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then I think the other thing is a lot of time when we're having conversations, we're talking at one another and not with one another. And so that with notion is really important. So by the time that somebody wants to work with me, they recognize I'm not going to talk at them. I'm not the one. That's not my life. That's your life, not my life. I'm here to listen. And then I'm here to give you perspective, or I'm here to give you additional knowledge, wisdom, or information that you didn't think about, or you weren't knowledgeable about. But the funny part is, the irony of all of this is, I can't begin to tell you how many clients of mine have said, or when I'm doing presentations have said, everything that you're saying is common sense. It just makes sense. It kind of pisses me off that you have to tell me this and I couldn't figure this out. And so where that comes into play is, number one, when you are a human who has a job, most of the time, your job, you're doing something else for somebody else. And that needs to be in a tangible product, like a what, right? You can put your hands around it and stuff. You don't deem success until you get to the end of something, or you can be like, look what I did, right? There's this whole element missing of I'm doing what I think everybody else needs to do so that I can get the highest performance review or the most money. And I haven't taken practice or stock in myself of what I like or what I don't like, or why I'm showing up this way or whatever like that, right? So for me, they're basically like, they're handing like their pain on a platter to me. And they're like, I need to do something about this. I'm finally ready to do something about this. I should have done something about this 10 years ago, or I've always been sitting in this, but now I can't do this any longer. And that's what COVID did for a lot of people. It held up the mirror and it said, how's your life working for you? And most people said, not so hot. Because when the distractions, I call it the caffeine, went away, where you couldn't go out to eat and you couldn't go get a drink and you couldn't go on vacation and you couldn't do this, all that distraction pulled away and you were stuck, quote, with yourself. Most people are like, I don't even know who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lack of practice. I think that this is what also happens when a lot of relationships fall apart, especially when the kids leave, is they were focused on this tangible thing in front of them and they forgot about themselves, and then, or the relationship. And then the kids leave and then they're like, we don't even know who each other are anymore. Well, there was no practice. Like, you forgot to keep your name at the top of your to-do list. You let it either off your to-do list or at the bottom of it. And you're like, if I have time, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that bad. You're projecting all this pain out and you've done nothing about it. And so when they come to me, I use a lot of analogies and metaphors. Clearly, you've heard a bunch of them already, right? But it's like, I have to almost get them to visualize what they're saying in words so that they can see what that feels like and they can put some ownership around it, or they can, like, the reason why burnout happens is because we never finish anything. So if they're sitting in pain, the goal is to say, hey, right now, here's what it feels like. It's like you're taking a giant piece of ice and you're putting it in a glass and you're trying to drink it, but like it's not working for you, versus let's compartmentalize everything like ice cubes and let's figure out what's going on in each area of your life. And then we can decide which one we're going after or which one we're going to deal with or whatever's really happening, right? And they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It just is helping them get answers to the end of these sentences that don't have periods on, because they just keep using 90% of the same thoughts on a daily basis and only 10% of their brain.
And you talk a lot about the thoughts, and the thoughts drive a lot of the actions and so forth. But over your left shoulder, you have a saying that says, make it happen. Yes. After people get the thoughts, how do you encourage people to use those thoughts and to make it happen? Do the walk and then do the talk after that. Like, what are some tips or tricks that you have for folks about how to take those thoughts and then make traction on that?
Sure. So the first one I ask people to do is we come up with a series of questions and I have them interview their most like intimate friends, not their significant other and not their parents and stuff, or like past bosses. So, and they have to sit in the passenger seat with the instructions of where the conversation is going, but they have to listen. That's like the biggest thing that's missing is they're not listening to their life. And so the answers are in the rooms that they're probably in, but they haven't heard them because they're too busy just trying to maintain like all this head trash that they got going on. So step number one is that's practice. Go and talk to your people and give them all the same questions. So one of the questions is, how would you describe me if I wasn't in the room and you needed to introduce me to somebody? That will tell you really fast how others are interpreting you. And these are like your people that you trust the most, right? Or that you appreciate their opinion. That's really important. Do you even appreciate their opinion? Why are you asking them if you don't? And then step number two in this ripple effect is, what's fascinating is that when we get your resume to a point and then we have updated LinkedIn, you start getting all these people that you don't know, like through recruiters or through managers or whatever, that says, yeah, I'm willing to have a conversation with you. You interest me. You intrigue me. We're speaking the same language. So then the next thing is having conversations with people that either have been advocates, ambassadors, and champions in the past that they need to update, because I've had this happen before. A client's mentor said, thank gosh we've had this conversation because I was still advocating for you like who you were 5 years ago. That job I was thinking that you'd be really great for, that would have not worked for you. That's where you were 5 years ago. Thanks for taking the time, right? So it's pulling up all these people that you appreciate versus just assuming that they get you, right? And then the third thing is getting in rooms that you've not been in before or that you have been in, and just pitching yourself and asking questions and listening and raising your hand. What I say is that people's comfort zones are way too small. I don't think you should be outside of your comfort zone. I think you just need to make your comfort zone a lot bigger. Yep. So if you think about like a rubber band, it's going to be a certain size, but if you keep pulling and stretching this, or like a hair tie, it's going to expand at some point. You need your comfort zone to expand. And so that's where this practice comes into play. So a lot of people will say to me, you're so articulate, Tori, with your words, and you do not fumble and you don't use these filler words. You're just like, let's go, right? And I get it. I talk fast and that's fine. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to change me. Like I will be aware of my surroundings, but if I start changing me, it's actually going to deplete me versus energize me. And I'm not here to be your entertainment of did I give you too much energy or not? That's on you. So it's expanding your comfort zone so that when you talk to somebody that it does, like you do want that job or you do want to land something, it's a done deal because you've got so much practice versus when I was a recruiter. My advice was, please, for the love of God, quit practicing on me. That's what happens all the time. It's like recruiters are the ones that get practice on. And they're like, I don't have time to educate you. You need to have your shit together so that I can figure out what to do with you so that you'll represent my name so much more better in a room that I put you in. Like the work is done, right? Don't start when you want a new job. Like that's really reactive and not proactive.
And that's some sick advice. And the analogy you use is like stretching out that rubber band of your comfort zone. I call it like increasing your surface area of luck, but you have to like expand beyond where you are now. Otherwise you're going to stay where you are. Yeah. So I have two more, like this has been a phenomenal conversation. I know you have stuff to do. You have shit to make happen, but I have two last questions for you. One is I always like to ask my guests, you've shared lots of great wisdom here, but what's another like piece of like a sick trick that you have for people that are trying to accelerate their careers?
About money. So first off, the book, You Are a Badass About Making Money is phenomenal. And we need to recognize that money is a vessel to our life. And that if you have a shitty relationship with money, it will not show up in your life. If you have a shitty friend, why do you want to be around them? Right? So money's the same way. Money likes being liked. And so you have to have a money mindset that allows you to have limitless opportunities in your life versus play this tit for tat game with money.
Okay. And so like money is almost the fuel to freedom or choice right. or
it's like control. The water under the boat, right? Like you are the boat and it's the water underneath. The boat doesn't move if there's no water or not enough of it, right?
Yeah. And I fundamentally agree with that. Sometimes people think that they don't deserve more money. I was like, well, A, you do. B, getting that more money will give you more time to spend with your family, healthcare, education, vacation.
Relief.
And reduce a lot of the worry and the concern and the limitations. Yeah. And it's not a cure-all, but it is the water that raises all tides.
The vessel.
Or that raises all boats. Yeah. And the last question I have for you, you shared lots of wisdom here. You also indicated that people are free to reach out to you and they likely won't. But if people do want to reach out to you, what's the best way that people can reach out to you?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. And so if you do connect with me on LinkedIn, don't just send me a connection, like send me a message of how we've met one another. That's so important. That saves you too in the future. And 3 years from now, you're like, oh yeah, now I'm going to reach out to her. Like that connection's already been in the history. I'm on Instagram. You can look up EvolYOUtion. And then you can always send me an email, which is tori@evolution.net. And don't forget it's spelled with a YOU in the middle of it.
Cool. And EvolYOUtion is EvolYOUtion.net.
Yes.
Great. Awesome, Tori. Well, thank you for your generosity, your wisdom, sharing all these great SYCK tricks. And yeah, I'm really so happy that Jeremy put us in touch together, just a random association, and we've become friends, and I look forward to continued partnership and friendship with you.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me. I think when people contact me, they're like, thanks so much for, talking to me. I'm like, this would never happen if you didn't reach out to me first. So thank you for having me in your arena and for supporting one another. I think that people get this twisted and they're like, why would two career people talk to one another? There's so much out there for the taking. And this is a great example of that.
It's abundance versus scarcity mindset that so many people get wrong.
Amazing conversation with Tori Stevens. Much appreciation to Tori for her insight on the show with Alan today. That wraps up another amazing episode of the SYCK Career Podcast with Alan Stein. Check out past episodes and other resources on the website. Just go to syckpodcast.com. That's SYCK. Alan, it seems like today may be a very good day to subscribe to the Kadima Accelerator newsletter.
Yes, every day is a good day to subscribe to the Accelerator, XLR8R, a little play on some license plate lingo. Every Wednesday, we distribute the Accelerator with great tips about how to accelerate your career, with updates about upcoming events or past events, and also great pictures of pooches and pets. So if you have a great pet, you want it included in the Accelerator, we may actually bump pictures of Tootsie and Coco, my dogs, for yours if you send a cute picture our way.
There you go. And keep checking back to the website because it's constantly updated. Once again, it's syckpodcast.com, SYCK. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba. We hope you've enjoyed the Tori Stevens episode, and you're going to love the next one.